My brother told me to blow off my doctor to chauffeur him to his game, calling me at 7 a.m. on the morning of my long-awaited cardiology appointment that took 3 months to schedule. "It's just a checkup. You can reschedule. But this is the championship," he said, as if my heart palpitations were a minor inconvenience compared to his recreational softball league. I told him no and went to my appointment, where my doctor found an irregular heartbeat that needed immediate attention. Before I share how my refusal to be his personal Uber driver led to him losing everything he held dear, let me tell you where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever had family treat you like their personal servant, and subscribe to hear how standing up for yourself can reveal who your real family is. The call came at exactly 7 in the morning, jolting me awake from restless sleep. My heart had been doing that thing again, that stuttering flutter that made me feel like my chest was filled with angry butterflies. I'd been waiting 3 months for this cardiology appointment, circling the date on my calendar in red marker, setting multiple phone reminders, because I knew my brother Marcus would find some way to make it about him. "Beck, I need you." Marcus's voice was already whining before I fully opened my eyes. Not, "Good morning," wait, not, "How are you feeling?" Just straight into his demands. That was Marcus. 36 years old and still acting like the golden child our parents had raised him to be. "Coach says we're definitely making the championship today, but Katie can't drive me because she's got some stupid bridal shower for her cousin." I sat up slowly, pressing my hand against my chest where my heart was already starting its irregular dance. "Marcus, I have my cardiology appointment today. You know this. I told you 3 weeks ago." Right. The heart thing." His dismissive tone made my jaw clench. "But Beck, this is the championship. We've been working toward this all season. You can reschedule your appointment. People do it all the time. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. His recreational softball league championship, the one that met every Sunday afternoon at the public park and whose biggest prize was a trophy from the local sporting goods store, was being positioned as more important than potentially diagnosing a serious cardiac condition. But this was so typically Marcus that I shouldn't have been surprised. "I'm not rescheduling," I said firmly, swinging my legs out of bed despite the dizziness. "This appointment took 3 months to get, and Dr. Patterson's office specifically said they couldn't guarantee another opening before the end of the year if I canceled." "Oh my God, Beck, you're being so dramatic." "It's just a checkup. You've been having those heart flutters for years, right? Another few months won't kill you. But this championship? This is today. I can't miss it. I'm the team captain. The guys are counting on me." The casual dismissal of my health concerns stung more than it should have, probably because it was so familiar. Growing up, Marcus had been the star athlete, the popular kid, the one who could do no wrong. I'd been the studious one, the responsible one, the one who our parents expected to put her own needs last to accommodate her brother's schedule. When Marcus needed rides to practice, Rebecca would handle it. When Marcus forgot his lunch, Rebecca would bring it to school. When Marcus got in trouble, Rebecca would smooth things over. "I'm not discussing this further," I said, heading to my bathroom. "I have to get ready for my appointment." "Are you serious right now? You're going to let your brother down for some routine doctor's visit?" His voice was rising, that petulant tone he'd perfected as a child still effective in his mid-30s. "What am I supposed to tell the team? That my sister couldn't be bothered to help me out on the most important day of the season? Tell them you're 36 years old and should have figured out alternative transportation before 7 in the morning on game day," I replied, my patience fraying. "Call an Uber. Ask one of your teammates. Call Katie and tell her to skip the bridal shower. Katie's not missing her cousin's shower for a softball game, and Uber's too expensive for a round trip. Beck, please, I'm begging you. Just this once." "Just this once?" I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. "Marcus, I've been bailing you out and rearranging my life around your needs since we were kids. When's the last time you did something for me? When's the last time you even asked how I was doing?" "Oh, here we go with the guilt trip." Classic Beck. His tone shifted from wheedling to aggressive. "You know what? Fine. Miss my championship game. But don't come crying to me the next time you need something. Don't expect me to help you move into your new apartment next month. Don't expect me to be there for your big moments if you can't show up for mine." The threat was empty, and we both knew it. Marcus had never helped me move, never shown up for my big moments, never been there when I actually needed him. His support had always been contingent on convenience, and even then, it usually involved me doing something for him first. "I'm going to my appointment," I said, ending the call before he could launch into another guilt-laden monologue. I got ready methodically, trying to ignore the angry texts that started flooding my phone. Marcus had apparently decided that if I wouldn't chauffeur him, he would spend his morning bombarding me with messages about what a selfish, inconsiderate sister I was. By the time I was dressed and ready to leave, I had 23 unread messages and 4 missed calls. Dr. Patterson's office was across town, a 40-minute drive in morning traffic that I'd planned for carefully. I arrived 15 minutes early, checked in at the front desk, and settled into the waiting room with the satisfaction of having prioritized my own health for once. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. this one saying he'd had to ask our parents for money to pay for an Uber, making sure I knew I'd cost them $70 round trip. Rebecca Sterling? The nurse called my name and I followed her back to the examination room, silencing my phone completely. Dr. Patterson was a kind-faced woman in her 50s who'd been recommended by my primary care physician after I'd described my symptoms. The irregular heartbeats that sometimes made me feel like my chest was doing somersaults, the occasional dizziness, the fatigue that seemed disproportionate to my activity level. She listened to my heart with a stethoscope, frowning slightly as she moved it across my chest. "I'm definitely hearing some irregularity," she said, making notes on her tablet. "Let's do an EKG right now, and I want to set you up with a Holter monitor to wear for the next 48 hours. Can you tell me more about when these palpitations typically occur?" I described the episodes in detail, the random nature of them, how sometimes they'd wake me from sleep, how occasionally they'd happen during mundane activities like grocery shopping or sitting at my desk at work. Dr. Patterson's expression grew more concerned as I spoke. The EKG took about 20 minutes with electrodes attached to various points on my chest and limbs. I stared at the ceiling tiles, trying to ignore the worried knot forming in my stomach. When the test was complete, Dr. Patterson studied the readout for what felt like an eternity. "Rebecca, I'm going to be direct with you," she finally said, her voice gentle but serious. "You have atrial fibrillation. Your heart's upper chambers aren't beating in sync with the lower chambers, which is causing these irregular rhythms you've been feeling. This is a serious condition that significantly increases your risk of stroke if left untreated." The room seemed to tilt slightly. How serious are we talking? If you had continued to delay this appointment, if you'd rescheduled today and waited another few months, you could have had a stroke. People with untreated AFib have a 5 times higher risk of stroke than those without the condition. The good news is that we've caught it now, and there are very effective treatments available. I'm prescribing blood thinners immediately, and we'll discuss other treatment options, including possible medication to regulate your heartbeat and potentially a procedure called cardioversion. I left the appointment 2 hours later with multiple prescriptions, a Holter monitor strapped to my chest, a follow-up appointment scheduled for next week, and a new perspective on my brother's morning demands. If I'd given in to Marcus's guilt trip and rescheduled my appointment, I might have literally died playing chauffeur to his recreational softball game. The irony wasn't lost on me as I drove home, carefully navigating traffic while acutely aware of every heartbeat. My phone showed 47 unread messages and 11 missed calls, all from Marcus or our parents. I waited until I was safely parked in my driveway before checking them. The messages from Marcus escalated from angry to victorious. They'd won the championship, no thanks to me. He'd hit the winning run. Everyone had asked where his sister was, and he'd had to explain that I'd prioritized a routine doctor's appointment over his big moment. Our parents' messages were more measured but equally disappointing. Mom wrote that she understood I had my appointment. But couldn't I have rescheduled just this once for something so important to Marcus? Dad said he was glad I'd gone to the doctor, but hoped I'd learn to be more flexible when family needed me. I sat in my car, staring at these messages from people who were supposed to care about my well-being, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about one morning or one appointment. This was a lifetime pattern of my needs being subordinate to Marcus's wants, and my parents enabling it every step of the way. Instead of responding immediately, I went inside, made myself tea, and sat down to think carefully about what Dr. Patterson had told me. Atrial fibrillation, stroke risk, blood thinners, potential procedures. This wasn't minor. This wasn't something I could have safely delayed. And my brother had known I was seeing a cardiologist, not just getting a flu shot or routine physical. That evening, my parents called for their weekly check-in, a Sunday ritual that usually involved them updating me on Marcus's life while asking perfunctory questions about mine. I let it go to voicemail, not yet ready to have the conversation I knew was coming. By Monday morning, I'd formulated a plan. Not a revenge plan exactly, but a boundary-setting plan that was long overdue. I'd spent 34 years putting everyone else first, particularly my brother. And where had it gotten me? Stressed, unappreciated, and nearly a stroke victim because I'd been too accommodating of other people's priorities. At work, my boss asked about my doctor's appointment. I'd mentioned it to her weeks ago when requesting the morning off. I told her about the diagnosis, watching her face transform from casual interest to genuine concern. "Rebecca, you need to take this seriously," she said, and I noticed how different her tone was from my family's dismissive response. "If you need time off for procedures or recovery, let me know immediately. Your health is the priority here." The contrast was stark. My boss, someone with no familial obligation to me, showed more concern for my well-being than my own brother had. That realization crystallized something that had been forming since Saturday morning. When my mother called again Monday evening, I answered. "Rebecca, honey, you really hurt your brother's feelings by not supporting him on Saturday. He worked so hard all season, and it would have meant so much to have his sister there. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart do that irregular flutter that would now always remind me of what might have been. Mom, I have atrial fibrillation. That's what the cardiologist diagnosed. If I'd rescheduled that appointment like Marcus wanted me to, I could have had a stroke. The doctor said people with untreated AFib have 5 times the normal stroke risk. There was a pause. Well, but you're on medication now, right? So everything's fine? Everything's not fine, Mom. I have a serious heart condition that needs ongoing treatment and monitoring. And Marcus knew I was seeing a cardiologist. He knew this wasn't a routine checkup. He just didn't care because his softball game was more important to him than my health. That's not fair, Rebecca. Marcus didn't know it was that serious. You've been talking about heart palpitations for years. How was he supposed to know this time was different? Because I told him 3 weeks ago that I was seeing a cardiologist, because the appointment took 3 months to get, because any reasonable person would understand that you don't cancel a specialist appointment for a recreational sports game. My voice was rising, and I forced myself to speak more calmly. But here's what bothers me most. Even now, knowing what the diagnosis was, you're more concerned about Marcus's hurt feelings than my nearly having a stroke. Now you're just being dramatic. Of course we care about your health, but Marcus is your brother, and family supports each other. He would have been there for you if you'd needed him. The laugh that escaped me was sharp and bitter. Would he? Name one time Marcus has put my needs before his wants. One time he's inconvenienced himself for me the way you've expected me to do for him my entire life. My mother couldn't answer that. Instead, she pivoted to the familiar territory of guilt. I don't know why you're being like this. We raised you to care about family, to be there for your brother. He's always looked up to you. He's never looked up to me, Mom. He's looked down at me from whatever pedestal you and Dad put him on, expecting me to serve as his supporting cast. But I'm done with that role. The week following my diagnosis brought unwelcome clarity about my family dynamic. Marcus texted twice, both times to share photos from the championship celebration I'd missed. Not once did he ask about my health or acknowledge that I'd been diagnosed with a serious condition. Our parents called Wednesday evening, ostensibly to check on me, but the conversation quickly turned to how I needed to apologize to Marcus for making him feel unsupported. He's really hurt, Rebecca, my father said, using his disappointed voice that had motivated me my entire childhood. He told us you hung up on him Saturday morning and then ignored all his messages. That's not how we raised you to treat family. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the Holter monitor still strapped to my chest recording every irregular heartbeat. Dad, did you hear what I told Mom? I have atrial fibrillation. The cardiologist said if I delayed treatment, I could have had a stroke. We heard that, honey, and we're glad you went to your appointment, but you have to understand how Marcus feels. This was the biggest game of his season, and his sister wasn't there to support him. You could have rescheduled. Doctors reschedule patients all the time. Something snapped inside me. You're right, Dad. Doctors do reschedule patients all the time. And you know what happens? Those patients sometimes die waiting for the next available appointment. But sure, Marcus's feelings about a recreational softball game are definitely more important than my literal heart condition. My father's voice hardened. There's no need for sarcasm, Rebecca. We're just asking you to see things from your brother's perspective. You've always been the responsible one, the one who thinks things through. Marcus needs more support, more understanding. That's just who he is. Who he is, I repeated slowly, is a 36-year-old man who called me at 7 in the morning demanding I cancel a specialist appointment so I could chauffeur him to a game. Who he is someone who sent me 47 angry texts while I was being diagnosed with a condition that could kill me. And apparently, who you are is parents who think that's acceptable behavior because Marcus needs more support. The silence on the other end was heavy with their disapproval. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice tight. I think you need some time to calm down. You're obviously stressed about your health situation, and you're taking it out on your family. We'll call you next week when you're feeling more reasonable. They hung up before I could respond. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling the weight of 34 years of being the reasonable one, the accommodating one, the one who was expected to bend and flex and sacrifice while Marcus remained rigid in his self-centeredness. That's when I started documenting everything. I went through years of text messages, emails, and calendar entries, creating a spreadsheet of every time I'd rearranged my life for Marcus, every soccer game I'd attended while he never came to my college graduation, every time I'd loaned him money that was never repaid, every birthday and holiday where my gifts to him were expensive and thoughtful while his to me, when he remembered it all, were generic gift cards purchased at the last minute. The pattern was undeniable. I'd been funding my own diminishment for decades, and my parents had not only allowed it, but actively encouraged it. They'd raised Marcus to expect constant accommodation and raised me to provide it without complaint. By Friday, when I returned to Dr. B. Patterson's office to return the Holter monitor and discuss the results, I'd made a decision. I was going to set boundaries, real ones, and enforce them regardless of my family's reaction. But I needed to be strategic about it. Going scorched earth would be satisfying, but ultimately self-defeating. I needed them to understand the consequences of their actions without me appearing to be the villain in their narrative. Dr. Patterson reviewed the Holter monitor results with concern. Your AFib episodes are more frequent than I'd hoped. You had 17 separate episodes over the 48-hour monitoring period, some lasting several hours. We need to be aggressive with treatment. I'm referring you to an electrophysiologist to discuss catheter ablation. What's that? I asked, making notes on my phone. It's a procedure where we use radio frequency energy to destroy the small areas of heart tissue causing the irregular rhythms. It's more invasive than medication alone, but given the frequency and duration of your episodes, I think it's our best option for long-term management. The consultation with the electrophysiologist was scheduled for 3 weeks out. The procedure itself, if we proceeded with it, would require general anesthesia, several hours in the hospital, and a recovery period of at least a week. Dr. Patterson was clear that this wasn't optional if I wanted to avoid serious complications. I left her office with a new understanding of the severity of my condition and a growing anger at how my family had trivialized it. That evening, I crafted a detailed email to my parents and Marcus, laying out my diagnosis, the treatment plan, and the potential complications if left untreated. I included medical literature about AFib, stroke risk, and the necessity of the ablation procedure. I made it clinical and factual, removing emotion from the equation. Marcus's response came within an hour. Sounds serious. Hope you feel better soon. 7 words. No apology, no acknowledgement of his behavior. Nothing. My parents didn't respond at all, but my friends, the ones I'd mentioned my diagnosis to, responded with concern and offers of help. My colleague Sarah immediately volunteered to drive me to and from the ablation procedure when it was scheduled. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, whom I'd only spoken to casually before, brought over homemade soup and asked what she could do to help. The contrast between my chosen family and my blood family was stark and illuminating. The following Sunday, I skipped the weekly family call. I'd never done that before, not in 15 years of the tradition. My phone rang at the usual time and I let it go to voicemail. Then Marcus called, then my mother again. I silenced my phone and went for a walk, feeling simultaneously guilty and liberated. Monday morning brought a text from my father. Your mother is very upset that you didn't call yesterday. This behavior is not like you. Please call her today. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on work, on my health, on setting up the support system I'd need for my upcoming procedure. I researched AFib support groups and found one that met virtually every Thursday evening. I attended my first meeting that week and found myself among strangers who understood my condition better than my own family did. It was during that support group meeting that I met Robert Ashford. He was 42, had been living with AFib for 5 years, and had successfully undergone the ablation procedure I was scheduled for. He was also, as he mentioned during his introduction, a medical malpractice attorney who specialized in cases involving delayed diagnosis and family interference in medical care. During the break, he approached me. I couldn't help overhearing your situation when you introduced yourself. Your brother tried to get you to skip a cardiology appointment for his softball game, recreational softball championship, I corrected with a bitter smile. Apparently much more important than my heart. Robert's expression darkened. I've seen cases where family pressure led to delayed medical care with tragic results. You're lucky you stood your ground. A lot of people don't. We exchanged contact information, and Robert mentioned that if I ever needed legal advice regarding medical decision-making or family interference with healthcare, he'd be happy to talk. I thanked him. Not yet sure what I'd do with that information, but tucking it away. 2 weeks after my diagnosis, my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find them standing in the hallway. My mother holding a casserole dish, my father looking stern and uncomfortable. We need to talk, my father said, brushing past me into the apartment before I could invite them in or turn them away. I closed the door slowly, preparing myself for the confrontation I'd known was inevitable. My mother set the casserole on the counter and turned to face me with an expression I'd seen countless times, loving but disappointed, as if I were a generally good child who'd inexplicably misbehaved. Rebecca, this has gone on long enough, she began. You've made your point. You're upset about Marcus asking you to reschedule your appointment, and we understand that. But you're being incredibly stubborn about this, and it's tearing our family apart. I'm being stubborn? I repeated, my voice calm despite the anger building in my chest. Mom, I have a serious heart condition. Marcus knew I was seeing a cardiologist and still demanded I cancel so I could drive him to a softball game. And when I wouldn't, he sent me 47 hostile text messages while I was being diagnosed with a potentially life-threatening condition. How is setting a boundary against that behavior stubborn? My father crossed his arms. Your brother has apologized. No, he hasn't. He sent me a 7-word text that said, "Sounds serious. Hope you feel better soon." That's not an apology. That's the bare minimum acknowledgement that something happened. Well, what do you want? My mother asked, her voice rising. Do you want him to grovel? To write you some elaborate apology? He said he hopes you feel better. What more can he do? I stared at her, genuinely shocked by the question. He could acknowledge that what he did was wrong. He could recognize that my health is more important than his recreational activities. He could show even a fraction of the concern for my well-being that he expects me to show for his convenience. Any of those things would be a start. "You're being unrealistic," my father said. "That's just Marcus. He's always been more focused on the moment, less aware of how his actions affect others. You know that about him. Why are you suddenly holding him to impossible standards?" "Because I'm 34 years old and I'm tired of being expected to accommodate his selfishness while he faces no consequences for his behavior. Because I nearly died playing supporting character in Marcus's life story, and neither of you seem to care." My mother's face crumpled. "Of course we care. We love you. We just don't understand why you're being so hard on your brother over one mistake." "One mistake?" I moved to my laptop, pulling up the spreadsheet I'd created. "In the last 5 years alone, Marcus has borrowed $17,000 from me that he's never repaid. He's canceled on me 43 times, usually within hours of planned events, while I've rearranged my schedule for him hundreds of times. He's attended exactly 2 events that were important to me, my college graduation and my 30th birthday party, and both times he left early. Meanwhile, I've attended every one of his games, tournaments, and celebrations. Every single one. Until now." My parents stared at the screen, seeing the documented evidence of a pattern they'd willfully ignored for decades. "Where did you get these numbers?" my father asked quietly. "From reality. From my bank statements, my calendar, my text messages. This isn't ancient history or exaggeration. This is documented fact. And the pattern goes back even further if we include childhood and college. You've been keeping a spreadsheet about your brother?" My mother's voice was horrified. "That's so cold, Rebecca. That's not what family does. What family does," I said, my voice sharp, "is show up for each other. What family does is prioritize each other's health and safety. What family does is reciprocate care and support. I've been doing all of that for Marcus my entire life. He's done none of it for me, and you've enabled it every step of the way." My father's face reddened. "We raised you to be independent, to be strong, to not need constant validation. Marcus needed more support, more guidance. That doesn't mean we love you less. It means you expect less of him and more of me. It means when he behaves badly, it's excused because that's just Marcus. But when I set a single boundary, I'm stubborn and unreasonable, and tearing the family apart. Do you see the double standard?" The conversation continued in circles for another hour. My parents insisted I was overreacting, making too much of one incident, letting stress about my health condition cloud my judgment. They couldn't or wouldn't see the pattern I was showing them, couldn't acknowledge that their parenting had created a dynamic where one child learned he could demand everything, while the other learned she was valued only for what she provided. Finally, exhausted and defeated, they left. My mother hugged me tightly at the door, whispering, "Please think about what we said. Family is everything. Honey, don't throw that away because you're angry." After they left, I sat in my apartment and cried, not from guilt or regret, but from grief. I was grieving the family I'd always wanted but never had, the one where both children were valued equally, where support went both ways, where my needs mattered as much as my brother's wants. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Mom says you showed them some spreadsheet about me? Really mature, Beck. Way to make everything about you." I blocked his number without responding. Then I called Robert Ashford. The electrophysiologist consultation was enlightening in ways that extended beyond my medical condition. Dr. Yashiro, a precise man in his 50s who specialized in cardiac ablation procedures, reviewed my case thoroughly before delivering his assessment. "Your AFib is persistent and symptomatic, which makes you an excellent candidate for ablation. However, I need to stress the importance of reducing stress in your life. Psychological stress is a significant trigger for AFib episodes, and I see from your Holter monitor results that several of your worst episodes coincided with periods of elevated heart rate consistent with emotional distress. I thought about Marcus's text barrage during my diagnosis, the confrontation with my parents, the ongoing family tension. What if the stress source is unavoidable? Dr. Feinge. Yashiro looked up from his tablet, his expression sharp. "Miss Sterling, very few stress sources are truly unavoidable. Saying they are is often a way of avoiding difficult decisions about boundaries and priorities. In my experience, patients who successfully manage AFib long-term are those who recognize that their health requires them to eliminate toxic situations, even when those situations involve people they care about." His words crystallized something I'd been circling around for weeks. My family wasn't just unsupportive. They were actively detrimental to my health. Every interaction with Marcus, every guilt trip from my parents, every expectation that I should prioritize their feelings over my well-being was literally affecting my heart. "The ablation procedure is scheduled for 6 weeks from now," Dr. Yashiro continued. "In the meantime, I want you to identify and minimize your stress triggers. Keep a journal of your AFib episodes and what preceded them. You might be surprised by the patterns you discover." I started the journal that evening, documenting not just physical symptoms, but emotional context. Within a week, the pattern was undeniable. My worst episodes occurred after family phone calls, text exchanges with Marcus, or interactions with my parents. Conversely, my heart remained steady during work, social activities with friends, and quiet evenings at home. The journal became evidence of something I'd known intellectually, but needed to see in black and white. My family was making me physically ill. Robert Ashford reviewed my documentation during our second meeting, this time at a coffee shop near my office. I'd reached out to him after blocking Marcus's number, initially just seeking advice on protecting my medical decision-making rights. But as we talked, the conversation expanded into broader territory. What you're describing is a pattern of emotional abuse and financial exploitation, Robert said, his professional demeanor somehow making the harsh words easier to hear. Your brother has been treating you as a resource to be extracted, and your parents have been enforcing that dynamic through guilt and obligation. The fact that it escalated to him demanding you risk your health for his convenience is just the logical endpoint of a lifetime of training you to put his needs first. But they love me, I heard myself say, the old programming running deep. They're not trying to hurt me. Intent doesn't negate impact. A drunk driver who kills someone didn't intend to, but the victim is still dead. Your family's inability or unwillingness to recognize how their behavior affects you doesn't make that behavior less harmful. Robert leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. You asked me about protecting your medical decision-making. Why? Are you worried they'll interfere with your treatment? The question hung in the air. Was I worried about that? I thought about my mother suggesting I could have rescheduled, my father's dismissal of my diagnosis as stress-induced drama, Marcus's complete lack of interest in my health beyond a perfunctory text. Would they respect my medical decisions if those decisions inconvenienced them? Yes, I admitted. If the ablation procedure is scheduled during something important to Marcus, they'll pressure me to reschedule. If my recovery period conflicts with a family event, they'll minimize my limitations and expect me to participate anyway. They've already shown me that my health is negotiable in their eyes. Then we need to establish legal protections, Robert said. I'm going to draft an advance directive that explicitly names your healthcare proxy and excludes your family from medical decision-making. I'm also going to prepare documentation of this pattern of behavior in case you need to establish grounds for a restraining order. A restraining order? Against my own family? The words felt surreal. Hopefully it won't come to that, but having the documentation ready means you're prepared if their behavior escalates. And in my experience, when people like your brother realize they can't control you anymore, they do escalate. I signed the advance directive the following week, naming my friend Sarah as my healthcare proxy. The document explicitly stated that my parents and Marcus had no authority over my medical care and could not override my decisions. It felt simultaneously empowering and devastating, like officially acknowledging that my family couldn't be trusted with something as fundamental as my health. The fallout from blocking Marcus's number came 2 weeks later. I was at work when my desk phone rang, an unusual occurrence since most communication happened via email or messaging apps. My father's voice came through, tight with anger. Your brother has been trying to reach you for days. Did you block his number? Yes, I said calmly, aware that my cubicle neighbors could hear my side of the conversation. After his last text, I decided I needed space from him. You can't just cut off your brother because you're in a bad mood, Rebecca. He's worried about you. We all are. The irony of claiming Marcus was worried when he'd shown no genuine concern since my diagnosis wasn't lost on me. I'm taking care of my health by reducing stress. My cardiologist specifically recommended minimizing stress triggers, and unfortunately, interactions with Marcus qualify. This is ridiculous. You're using your medical condition to manipulate the family and make yourself the center of attention. Marcus has been very patient with your attitude, but you're pushing him too far. Something inside me went very cold and very calm. Dad, I'm at work and can't have this conversation right now. I need to go. Don't you dare hang up on me. We need to resolve this today. Marcus wants to apologize properly, and you won't even give him the chance. If Marcus wants to apologize, he can send a letter, a real apology, taking responsibility for his behavior without deflection or excuses. When I receive that, I'll consider whether I want to resume contact with him. You're being completely unreasonable. This is not how we raised you to treat family. Your mother is in tears over this, convinced she failed as a parent because her daughter has turned so cold and selfish. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost laughable. I'm ending this call now. Please don't contact me at work again. I hung up, my hands shaking slightly, aware of my elevated heart rate. My cubicle neighbor, Jennifer, appeared at the partition with a concerned expression. Are you okay? That sounded intense. I gave her the abbreviated version, watching her face shift from sympathy to anger as I explained the situation. Jennifer was 45, divorced, with 2 adult children of her own. Her perspective was immediate and uncompromising. Block their numbers too, she said flatly. All of them. And document this call. That was harassment at your workplace. Your father had no right to call you here, and his attempt to guilt-trip you using your mother's supposed tears is textbook emotional manipulation. She was right, and I knew it. I blocked my parents' numbers from my cell phone and asked our office manager to screen calls to my desk phone. Then I sent a brief email to all 3 of them, stating that I needed space to focus on my health and would reach out when I was ready to resume communication. I requested they respect my boundary and not attempt to contact me through work, friends, or surprise visits. The email felt like dropping a bomb. I knew it would explode in my face, but I also knew it was necessary. Dr. Yashiro was right. Few stress sources were truly unavoidable, and I was choosing to avoid mine. The explosion came faster than I expected. That evening, I returned home to find my mother sitting in her car outside my apartment building. She got out when she saw me, her face blotchy from crying, her posture radiating wounded martyrdom. "How could you block us?" she said, her voice breaking. "Your own parents? We're worried sick about you and you won't even let us check if you're okay." I stopped several feet away, maintaining physical distance. "Mom, I sent an email explaining that I need space. You showing up after I asked for boundaries, is exactly why I need that space. We're your family, Rebecca. You can't just shut us out because we don't agree with every decision you make. That's not how family works." "How does family work, Mom? Because from where I'm standing, it seems to work like this. I sacrifice my needs for Marcus's wants. You and Dad reinforce that dynamic. And when I finally say no, I'm selfish and unreasonable. That's the pattern. That's what you're asking me to accept as normal. We've never asked you to sacrifice anything. You're twisting everything to make us look bad so you can justify your behavior." I pulled out my phone, opening the health app that tracked my heart rate and AFib episodes. "See these red bars? Those are AFib episodes. Notice how they cluster? Those clusters correspond exactly with family phone calls and text exchanges. My cardiologist says stress triggers these episodes. You are literally making me sick." My mother stared at the screen, her expression shifting between denial and hurt. "That's not fair. You can't blame us for your medical condition. The doctor said you have AFib. That's not because of phone calls. The AFib is a structural problem, but the episodes are triggered by stress. This is documented medical fact, Mom. And the biggest source of stress in my life is the dynamic where my health and well-being are always subordinate to Marcus's feelings. Why do you keep making this about Marcus? This is about you being unable to handle normal family disagreements like an adult. Your brother made one mistake, asked you to do one thing at an inconvenient time, and you've turned it into this huge drama that's destroying our family. One thing at an inconvenient time, I repeated slowly. "Mom, he asked me to cancel a cardiology appointment I'd waited 3 months for so I could drive him to a recreational softball game. Then he sent me 47 hostile messages while I was being diagnosed with a condition that could cause a stroke. That's not one mistake at an inconvenient time. That's a pattern of entitled behavior where my health literally doesn't matter to him." We argued in circles for another 20 minutes, my mother unable to acknowledge the severity of what had happened, unable to see beyond her narrative of family harmony being destroyed by my stubbornness. Finally, she left, but not before delivering a parting shot. "Your father and I are going to keep trying to reach you because we love you. We're not going to abandon our daughter just because she's going through a difficult time and lashing out at the people who care about her most. When you're ready to be reasonable, we'll be here." The framing was perfect. I was going through a difficult time and lashing out, not setting reasonable boundaries against harmful behavior. They would keep trying to reach me, not respecting my clearly stated needs. They loved me as long as I performed love in the way they demanded. That night, I contacted my apartment building's management and added my parents and Marcus to a do not admit list. I changed my email address and gave the new one only to people I trusted. I felt like I was going into witness protection, hiding from people who were supposed to be my closest relationships. The support group met virtually that Thursday, and I shared what was happening. The response was overwhelming. Nearly everyone had similar stories of family members who minimized their condition, who created stress that triggered episodes, who demanded the patient prioritize family obligations over health management. My sister told me I was being dramatic when I said I needed to avoid stressful situations, one woman shared. Then she invited me to Thanksgiving dinner knowing my ex-husband would be there and couldn't understand why I didn't want to come. She said I was choosing to be sick instead of choosing family. Robert spoke up from his square on the screen. "This is called medical abuse, and it's more common than people realize. Family members who refuse to respect a patient's medical needs and boundaries, who create situations that exacerbate health conditions, who pressure patients to prioritize social obligations over treatment plans, that's abuse. Full stop." After the meeting ended, Robert messaged me privately. "How are you holding up with the family pressure?" "I'm managing. Barely. Is it always this hard?" "The initial boundary setting is the hardest part. They're used to you complying with their demands, so when you stop, they escalate to try to force you back into the old pattern. It gets easier once they realize the escalation isn't working. But I won't lie to you. Some family relationships don't survive this process. Maybe they're not supposed to," I typed, the words feeling both true and tragic. As my ablation procedure date approached, I built a support network that excluded my biological family entirely. Sarah would drive me to and from the hospital. Jennifer volunteered to stay with me for the first 2 days of recovery. Mrs. Chen offered to handle my grocery shopping and meal prep. My chosen family was stepping up in ways my blood family never had. 3 days before the procedure, I received a certified letter at my office. It was from Marcus. handwritten on legal pad paper, running 4 pages long. I opened it with dread, expecting more guilt trips and accusations. Instead, I found something I'd never seen from my brother before. Genuine self-awareness. Not full accountability, not quite an apology, but closer than I'd expected him to get. The letter from Marcus sat on my kitchen counter for 2 days before I could bring myself to read it completely. The handwriting was his, messy and rushed. Nothing like the careful, calculated communications I'd received from my parents. When I finally sat down with coffee and forced myself to read every word, I found something unexpected. Evidence of my brother's complete lack of growth. Beck, it started, already using the diminutive nickname I'd told him repeatedly I disliked. Mom says you're having some serious heart procedure and you won't let them help. That's messed up. I know you're mad about the championship game thing, but you're taking it too far. I said I hope you feel better. What more do you want? I'm writing this because Dad says you demanded a letter, so here it is. I'm sorry you felt bad about the game situation. I didn't know it would be that big of a deal to reschedule a doctor appointment. You've always been healthy, so how was I supposed to know this time was different? You never tell anyone when things are serious. You just expect people to read your mind and then get mad when they can't. That's not fair to me or Mom and Dad. I had to stop reading, my heart doing that familiar, irregular flutter. He was apologizing for my feelings, not his actions. He was making my health crisis about his inconvenience. The letter continued in this vein for 4 pages, a masterclass in non-apology apologies and responsibility dodging. Katie says you're being too sensitive and that I should just ignore you until you calm down. But Mom's really upset and I hate seeing her cry. She keeps saying she doesn't know where she went wrong with you, that she raised us to stick together no matter what. So I'm trying to fix this even though I don't think I did anything that wrong. You're my sister, and I guess I love you or whatever. So let's just forget about this whole thing and move on. Life's too short to hold grudges, right? I'll come visit you after your surgery if you want. Marcus. I photographed every page of the letter, then filed it carefully in a folder I'd labeled documentation. Robert had been right about keeping records. This letter was proof that Marcus fundamentally didn't understand what he'd done wrong and had no intention of changing his behavior. The day before my procedure, my mother called Sarah's cell phone. Sarah had made the mistake of being listed as my emergency contact at my doctor's office, and somehow my mother had obtained that number. Sarah answered while I was in the room, putting it on speaker when she realized who it was. I need to speak with Rebecca. My mother's voice was tight with controlled panic. She's having surgery tomorrow, and her family should be there. This is ridiculous, Sarah. You know it's ridiculous. Please tell her to call me. Sarah, bless her, didn't miss a beat. Mrs. Sterling, Rebecca is managing her health care with the support system she's chosen. She's asked her family to respect her boundaries, and I'm going to respect her wishes by not passing this call to her. She's manipulated you. She's told you things about us that aren't true, made us sound like terrible people so you'd take her side. We love our daughter. We just want to be there for her during this scary time. If you loved her, Sarah's voice was sharp, you would respect her explicitly stated needs instead of trying to circumvent them. I'm ending this call now. She hung up before my mother could respond, then immediately blocked the number. That woman is something else. The guilt trip, the manipulation, the refusal to respect a clear boundary, I see where your brother gets it from. That evening, I wrote my own letter, not to my family, but to myself, a manifesto of sorts, stating clearly what I needed to remember when the guilt and doubt inevitably crept in. I listed every boundary violation, every manipulation attempt, every time my health had been treated as secondary to my family's convenience. Then I listed every person who had shown up for me during this crisis, every genuine act of support, every relationship that had proven itself worthy of my trust. The contrast was damning. My biological family had offered criticism, guilt trips, and demands. My chosen family had offered rides, meals, time, and unwavering support. The people who shared my DNA had treated my life-threatening condition as an inconvenience. The people I'd chosen to surround myself with had treated it with the seriousness it deserved. The ablation procedure required me to check into the hospital at 6 a.m. Sarah picked me up at 5, stopping for coffee, even though I couldn't drink it before surgery. For after, she said, placing the cup in the car's holder, something to look forward to. The pre-op process was efficient and clinical. I changed into the hospital gown, had an IV placed, met with the anesthesiologist, and reviewed the procedure one final time with Dr. Yashiro. He was confident, reassuring, everything I needed him to be. Your heart is going to be much happier after this, he said with a slight smile, and hopefully your stress levels will decrease once you're not constantly dealing with AFib episodes. You've made good choices about managing your triggers. Keep that up during recovery. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I felt a strange sense of peace. I was taking control of my health, supported by people who genuinely cared about my well-being. Whatever happened with my biological family, I was going to be okay. The procedure itself was a blur of anesthesia-induced unconsciousness. I woke up in recovery several hours later, groggy and uncomfortable but alive. Sarah was there, sitting in the visitor's chair, looking up from her book when she heard me stir. "Hey there, Sleeping Beauty. How do you feel?" "Like someone burned parts of my heart with lasers," I croaked, my throat sore from the breathing tube. That's because someone did burn parts of your heart with lasers. But Dr. Yashiro says it went perfectly. He got all the problematic areas, and your heart rhythm has been normal since the procedure ended. Normal. My heart was beating normally, steadily, without the frightening flutter that had become my constant companion. I started crying, surprising both Sarah and myself. Hey, what's wrong? Are you in pain? Should I get the nurse? I'm fine, I managed through the tears. I didn't realize how scared I was until it was over. And you're here. You showed up for me. Sarah gripped my hand gently. Of course I showed up. That's what friends do. The first day of recovery was rough. I was exhausted, uncomfortable, and dealing with various post-procedure symptoms that were normal but unpleasant. But I was also monitoring my heart rate on the hospital equipment, watching the steady, regular rhythm with a sense of wonder. For the first time in months, my heart was behaving the way it was supposed to. My phone, which Sarah had turned off during the procedure, revealed 17 missed calls when she powered it back on that evening. All from my parents' home number, the one I hadn't blocked because I didn't think they'd use it to circumvent my boundaries. There were also 3 voicemails. Want me to listen to them? Sarah offered. Screen them for you? I nodded, not trusting myself to hear my mother's voice without having an emotional response that might affect my recovery. Sarah put in her earbuds and listened, her expression growing darker with each message. They're all guilt trips, she reported. Your mom crying about how cruel you're being, how you're going through this major medical procedure without your family, how they deserve to be there. Because they love you. The third one is your dad saying that if something goes wrong during surgery, you'll regret not letting them be there, which is manipulative as hell, by the way, trying to use fear of surgical complications to get you to break your boundaries. I wasn't surprised, just tired and sad. Block that number too, please. Sarah did, then settled back in her chair. You don't have to justify your choices to me, but I have to ask. Are you sure about cutting them off completely? I support you regardless, but that's a big decision. I'm sure, I said, my voice stronger than I felt, because they're not actually worried about me. If they were, they'd respect my boundaries. They'd accept that I need space. They're worried about their narrative, about being the good parents who are there for their daughter. They want the appearance of a loving family without doing any of the actual work of respecting my needs. I spent 3 days in the hospital, longer than the typical overnight stay because my blood pressure remained elevated. Dr. Yashiro attributed it to stress and prescribed not just medication but also a stern lecture about protecting my emotional health with the same diligence I was now showing for my physical health. You've fixed the electrical problem in your heart, he said during my final examination before discharge. Now you need to maintain that fix by avoiding the triggers that caused the AFib in the first place. Stress management isn't optional for you, Miss Sterling. It's a critical component of your treatment plan. Jennifer picked me up from the hospital, taking me back to my apartment where Sarah had already stocked my refrigerator, set up a recovery station on my couch, and left detailed instructions for my medication schedule. Mrs. Chen arrived an hour later with enough homemade soup to feed me for a week. You need good nutrition for healing, she said firmly, organizing containers in my fridge. No ordering takeout. I bring you dinner every evening this week. I tried to protest, embarrassed by her generosity, but she waved me off. You are a good neighbor. Always kind, always respectful. This is what community does. We take care of each other. Community. The word struck me. I'd been so focused on family, on blood relationships, that I'd undervalued the community I'd built around myself. These people, Sarah and Jennifer and Mrs. Chen and the others who'd checked in or offered help, they were showing me what genuine care looked like. My recovery progressed well. The discomfort faded, my energy slowly returned, and most importantly, my heart maintained its steady, regular rhythm. I attended follow-up appointments where Dr. Yashiro pronounced himself satisfied with my progress. I returned to work part-time after 2 weeks, grateful for the flexibility my boss offered. What I didn't do was contact my family. The silence from my end was met with escalating attempts at contact from theirs. They tried calling from friends' phones, sending messages through distant relatives, even showing up at my workplace once before Jennifer intercepted them and had security escort them out. Each boundary violation was documented, photographed, and added to the file Robert was helping me maintain. The pattern was clear and damning. My family's inability to respect my needs, their prioritization of their own comfort over my well-being, their fundamental belief that they were entitled to access to me regardless of my wishes. 6 weeks after the procedure, I received a letter from an attorney representing my parents. It was professionally written legalese that basically accused me of elder abuse by abandoning my parents in their time of need. They were threatening to sue for emotional distress and demanding I resume contact immediately. I forwarded the letter to Robert, who responded within an hour. Don't respond directly. I'll handle this, but this is actually helpful. It establishes a paper trail of their harassment and makes your case for a restraining order much stronger if we need to go that route. The lawsuit threat was empty, Robert assured me. I hadn't abandoned anyone. I'd simply set boundaries as an adult, but the fact that they'd weaponized the legal system to try to force contact spoke volumes about their mindset. They viewed me as property they had rights to, not as a person with agency and needs of my own. That's when I decided it was time to stop being reactive and start being strategic. My family wanted to force me back into the role of accommodating daughter and sister. They were using every manipulation tactic they knew, but they'd made one critical error. They'd underestimated me. I'd spent 34 years learning their patterns, understanding their tactics, and absorbing their strategies. Now it was time to use that knowledge not to accommodate them, but to ensure they could never force me into that role again. I called Robert. I want to go on the offensive. What are my options? Robert arrived at my apartment that evening with a leather portfolio and the focused energy of an attorney who'd been given permission to unleash carefully controlled fury. He spread documents across my kitchen table, creating a map of legal warfare that made my pulse quicken with something I hadn't felt in months: power. Before we proceed, I need you to be absolutely certain, he said, his voice measured. What I'm proposing is not reconciliation. This is not about bringing your family to understanding. This is about permanently establishing boundaries and ensuring they face consequences for their pattern of behavior. Once we start, there's no going back to how things were. There's no going back anyway, I replied, my voice steady. They've made that impossible. I'm just deciding whether to keep playing defense or start playing offense. Robert nodded and opened the first folder. Let's start with what we have. Documented evidence of harassment at your workplace, multiple boundary violations after explicit requests for space, a frivolous legal threat designed to manipulate you, and medical documentation that their behavior exacerbates a serious health condition. That's enough for a restraining order, but I think we can do better. How much better? Your brother has been borrowing money from you for years without repayment. That's legally recoverable debt. The spreadsheet you created establishes a pattern and includes specific amounts and dates. We can sue him for repayment plus interest, legal fees, and damages for emotional distress. Given his employment instability and apparent financial issues, this will likely force him into bankruptcy. The words should have shocked me, but instead, I felt a cold satisfaction settling over me. Marcus had spent years treating me like an ATM, confident I'd never demand repayment because family doesn't keep score. He was about to learn that I'd kept meticulous score. Your parents' lawsuit threat is actionable, Robert continued. We can file a countersuit for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The medical evidence is damning. Your AFib episodes directly correlating with their contact, your doctor's explicit instructions to minimize stress, their continued violations of your stated boundaries after being informed of your medical needs. A jury would be very sympathetic. What would that accomplish? I asked, needing to understand the full scope. Financial consequences, public record of their behavior, and legal precedent that protects you from future contact. But more than that, it sends a message that their actions have real-world repercussions. They've spent your entire life teaching you that Marcus faces no consequences while you're expected to absorb all the costs. We're reversing that dynamic permanently. I thought about the championship game, about my mother showing up at my apartment after I'd asked for space, about my father calling my workplace to harass me, about Marcus's non-apology letter. I thought about lying on my apartment floor after my diagnosis, alone and terrified, while my family sent guilt trips instead of support. Do it, I said. All of it. Robert drafted the documents over the next week. The demand letter to Marcus itemized every loan with dates, amounts, and evidence in the form of bank transfers and text messages acknowledging the debts. The total, with interest calculated from the date of each loan, came to $23,000. The letter gave him 30 days to begin repayment or face a lawsuit. The restraining order petition against all three of them documented every boundary violation with photographic evidence, medical records linking their behavior to my health condition, and testimony from witnesses including Sarah, Jennifer, and my doctors. It requested a 200-foot protective order preventing contact of any kind. The countersuit against my parents for harassment and emotional distress was 30 pages of documented abuse. From the initial demand that I skip my cardiology appointment to the ongoing campaign of boundary violations. Robert had included a detailed timeline, witness statements, and expert medical testimony about the connection between stress and AFib. This will destroy them financially and socially, Robert warned as I reviewed the documents. The court proceedings will be public record. People in your hometown will know what they did. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Dr. Yashiro's words. Few stress sources are truly unavoidable. I'd been avoiding the difficult decision, hoping somehow my family would miraculously develop respect for my boundaries. But hope wasn't a strategy, and I was done hoping they'd change. I'm prepared, I said, signing each document with a steady hand. The service of process happened simultaneously. Marcus received his demand letter at his home. My parents received their restraining order petition and the countersuit paperwork at their house. I'd arranged for professional process servers to deliver everything at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning, ensuring maximum impact. Marcus called from a blocked number within an hour, his voice a mixture of panic and rage. $23,000? Are you insane? I don't have that kind of money. This is blackmail. It's debt repayment, I said calmly, having prepared for this call. Money you borrowed with explicit promises to repay. I have records of every transaction and every promise. That was family stuff. You're my sister. You don't charge your brother interest like some kind of loan shark. Family stuff implies reciprocity, Marcus. It implies mutual support and respect. You've shown none of that. This is simply me treating our financial arrangements as what they actually were. Loans that you failed to repay. I'll tell everyone what you're doing. Mom and Dad are already talking to people in town. You're going to be the villain here, Beck, not me. Everyone's going to know you sued your own brother. Actually, everyone's going to know that you borrowed thousands of dollars from your sister and refused to pay it back. They're going to know you pressured her to cancel a life-saving medical appointment so you could play softball. They're going to know that when she was diagnosed with a serious heart condition, you sent hostile text messages instead of support. But please, Marcus, tell everyone. The more people who know the truth, the better. He hung up, but the calls didn't stop. My parents reached out through every channel they could think of, leaving voicemails on friends' phones, sending emails to my work address, even contacting distant relatives to pressure me. Each attempt was documented and added to our evidence file, strengthening our case with every boundary violation. The temporary restraining order hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Robert had warned me it would be difficult, that my parents would likely portray themselves as loving parents being unjustly shut out by an ungrateful daughter. I needed to be prepared for lies, manipulations, and public character assassination. What I wasn't prepared for was Marcus showing up at my apartment building 3 days before the hearing. I was returning from a follow-up cardiology appointment, pleased with Dr. Yashiro's assessment that my heart was functioning perfectly post-ablation, when I found Marcus sitting on the front steps of my building. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing wrinkled clothes, his eyes bloodshot. "We need to talk," he said, standing as I approached. "Please, Beck, just 5 minutes. We have nothing to discuss. You've been served with a demand letter. Any communication should go through attorneys." "I don't have an attorney. I can't afford an attorney. Do you understand what you're doing to me?" His voice cracked. "Katie left me. She said she can't be with someone who treats family like this, who's being sued by his own sister. My job is hanging by a thread because I can't focus on anything. You're destroying my life over money. I'm enforcing consequences for your actions," I corrected, maintaining distance. "You borrowed money and didn't repay it. You treated me like a resource instead of a person. You demanded I risk my health for your convenience. These are the natural results of those choices." "Natural results?" He laughed bitterly. "Natural results would be us working this out as a family. This is revenge. You're punishing me because I asked you for one favor at a bad time. You're still minimizing it," I observed. "Even now, facing financial ruin, you can't acknowledge what you actually did. You didn't ask for a favor at a bad time. You demanded I cancel a critical medical appointment while knowing it was with a cardiologist. You sent me dozens of hostile messages while I was being diagnosed with a condition that could have killed me. You've borrowed thousands of dollars without repaying a cent. And you've never, not once, genuinely apologized or taken responsibility." "What do you want from me?" he shouted, drawing attention from passersby. "You want me to grovel? To beg? Fine. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry for all of it. I was selfish and entitled, and I took you for granted." Is that what you need to hear? 3 weeks ago, that might have meant something. Now? I shook my head. Now I know you're only saying it because you're facing consequences, not because you actually understand what you did wrong. You're not sorry you hurt me, Marcus. You're sorry you're finally being held accountable. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to hurt. "You have to drop this lawsuit. I'll pay you back, I swear. I'll figure out a payment plan. Just please, don't take this to court." I pulled my arm free and stepped back, my heart rate elevating. "Don't touch me again. If you do, I'll call the police right now." "They're going to take everything," he said, his voice breaking. "The lawyer Dad hired says I'll probably have to declare bankruptcy. I'll lose my credit, maybe my job. Beck, I'm your brother. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It meant everything to me," I said quietly. "That's why this hurts so much. But you taught me that being family isn't enough. You taught me that through every broken promise, every unreturned loan, every time you prioritized your wants over my needs. I'm just applying the lesson you spent 30 years teaching me." I walked past him into the building, using my key fob to enter and ensuring the door locked behind me. Through the glass, I watched him stand there for several minutes before finally walking away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The temporary restraining order hearing was held in a small courtroom with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that cast everything in harsh relief. My parents arrived with their attorney, a local lawyer named David Brennan who specialized in family law. They looked smaller than I remembered, older, my mother's hair more gray than I'd noticed before, my father's posture no longer commanding but defensive. Judge Caroline Mitchell presided, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that suggested she'd seen every manipulation tactic in the book. She reviewed our petition silently for several minutes before addressing the room. "This is a hearing to determine whether a temporary restraining order should be issued against Leonard and Patricia Sterling and Marcus Sterling, preventing contact with the petitioner, Rebecca Sterling. Mr. Brennan, your clients wish to contest this petition. Brennan stood, smoothing his tie. Yes, Your Honor. My clients are loving parents who are deeply concerned about their daughter's well-being. They believe Ms. Sterling is experiencing psychological distress related to her recent medical diagnosis and has, unfortunately, pushed away the family members who care most about her. They're not trying to harass her. They're trying to help her during what they perceive as a mental health crisis. The strategy was predictable but effective if I weren't prepared. Paint me as unstable, frame their boundary violations as concern, suggest I needed their intervention rather than their absence. Robert stood to respond. Your Honor, we have substantial documentation contradicting the respondent's narrative. The petitioner has a serious cardiac condition that is directly exacerbated by stress. Her cardiologist has explicitly recommended minimizing stressful situations, and we have medical evidence showing that contact with her family causes measurable increases in heart arrhythmia episodes. The respondents have been informed of this medical necessity multiple times and have continued to violate clearly stated boundaries. This isn't a case of concerned parents helping a struggling daughter. This is a case of family members prioritizing their own comfort over the petitioner's medical needs. Judge Mitchell gestured to Robert. I'll hear your evidence. Robert presented the timeline with precision. My mother's appearance at my apartment after I'd requested space. My father's call to my workplace. The 17 phone calls on the day of my surgery from blocked numbers. The letter from their attorney threatening a baseless lawsuit. Each violation was documented with dates, times, photographs, and witnesses. Then came the medical evidence. Dr. Yashiro had provided a detailed affidavit explaining AFib, stress triggers, and the specific correlation between my family contact and episode frequency. Dr. Patterson had done the same, emphasizing how my delay in seeking treatment had been dangerous, and noting my family's dismissive response to my diagnosis. The petitioner's brother, Marcus Sterling, called her at 7 a.m. on the morning of a long-awaited cardiology appointment, and pressured her to cancel that appointment so she could drive him to a recreational softball game, Robert explained. When she refused and attended her appointment, she was diagnosed with atrial fibrillation that, if left untreated, could have caused a stroke. Her brother's response was to send her 47 text messages expressing anger about his inconvenience while she was receiving this potentially life-saving diagnosis. Judge Mitchell's expression hardened as she reviewed the text message transcript we'd submitted. She looked up at my parents. Were you aware your daughter had a serious cardiac condition? My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. We knew she was having heart palpitations, but she's always been anxious, always worried about her health. We didn't realize it was this serious. Your daughter told you she was seeing a cardiologist. She explicitly explained her diagnosis after the appointment. She provided you with medical literature about her condition. Judge Mitchell's voice was sharp. At what point did you plan to take her seriously? We do take her seriously, my father interjected, but she's using her medical condition to manipulate the family dynamic. She's always resented the attention we gave Marcus, and now she's found a way to make everything about her by claiming we're making her sick. The statement hung in the air, so revealing in its dismissiveness that I saw Judge Mitchell's expression shift from professional neutrality to barely concealed disgust. Robert seized the moment. Your Honor, that response perfectly encapsulates the problem. The respondents view their daughter's serious medical condition as manipulation, rather than legitimate health concern. They view her request for space as resentment rather than necessary self-care. This pattern of minimizing her needs while prioritizing their son's wants is documented throughout their relationship and has now reached a point where it's literally dangerous to her health. Judge Mitchell turned to me. Ms. Sterling, would you like to address the court? I stood, my prepared statement trembling slightly in my hands. Your Honor, I love my family, or at least I love who I thought they were. But over the past few months, I've realized that their love for me is conditional on my compliance with their expectations. When I prioritize my health over my brother's convenience, I'm selfish. When I set boundaries to protect my medical needs, I'm manipulative. When I enforce consequences for behavior that nearly cost me my life, I'm destroying the family. I'm not asking for punishment or revenge. I'm asking for the legal protection I need to maintain the boundaries my doctors have prescribed as essential to my health. I'm asking to be allowed to heal, physically and emotionally, without constant pressure to put my family's feelings before my survival. The courtroom was silent when I finished. Judge Mitchell made notes on her tablet, then addressed both attorneys. I'm granting the temporary restraining order. The respondents are prohibited from contacting Ms. Sterling directly or indirectly, from coming within 200 feet of her residence or workplace, and from making any further legal threats or harassment attempts. This order will remain in effect pending a full hearing in 30 days. At which time we'll determine whether to make it permanent. My mother's sob echoed through the courtroom. My father's face turned red with suppressed rage. Their attorney whispered urgently to them, probably advising them not to react in a way that would worsen their situation. As I left the courtroom with Robert, I heard my father's voice calling after me. "This isn't over, Rebecca. You can't just erase your family because we don't agree with every decision you make." Judge Mitchell's voice cut through the space. "Mr. Sterling, you have just been issued a restraining order. Any further contact with your daughter will result in contempt charges. I suggest you refrain from speaking to her again." Outside the courthouse, Robert turned to me with something like pride in his expression. That went better than I expected. Mitchell saw right through their manipulation tactics. "The permanent order is almost certainly going to be granted. What about Marcus's debt?" I asked. "That's separate civil litigation. With his financial situation, he'll likely file for bankruptcy, which means you won't recover the full amount. But the judgment will be on his credit report, and he'll face consequences beyond the money. His bankruptcy will list you as a creditor, which means everyone who sees that filing will know he defaulted on debts to his own sister." The permanent restraining order hearing 3 weeks later was almost anticlimactic. My parents' attorney had advised them not to contest it, recognizing they had no viable defense against the documented evidence. Marcus didn't appear at all, having filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy the week before, and apparently decided to cut his losses. Judge Mitchell made the order permanent with barely concealed disdain for my family's behavior. I've been on the bench for 22 years, and I've seen many varieties of family dysfunction. But the level of entitlement and disregard for medical necessity displayed by the respondents in this case is remarkable. Ms. Sterling, I hope you find the peace and health you deserve, free from people who should have protected you, but instead endangered you. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine freedom. The legal system had validated what I'd known but struggled to accept, that my family's behavior was wrong, that my boundaries were reasonable, that I had the right to protect myself, even from people who shared my blood. Robert walked me to my car, his usual professional demeanor softening slightly. "How are you feeling?" "These proceedings can be emotionally exhausting even when they go in your favor." "I feel like I can finally breathe," I admitted. "Like I've been holding my breath for 34 years, waiting for permission to put myself first. And a judge just gave me that permission in writing." "You always had that permission," he said gently. "You just needed to give it to yourself." He was right, but having it legally codified helped. The restraining order wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof that my needs mattered, that my boundaries were valid, that protecting my health was more important than maintaining the appearance of family harmony. 6 months after the permanent restraining order was issued, I stood in my cardiologist's office, receiving the news I'd been hoping for. Dr. Yashiro reviewed my latest monitoring results with evident satisfaction. "Your heart function is excellent. No AFib episodes in 4 months. Your stress indicators are significantly decreased, and your overall cardiac health has improved remarkably. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." "I eliminated my biggest stress triggers," I said with a slight smile. "Turns out that has measurable health benefits." He nodded, understanding the subtext. "I've seen it before. Patients who remove themselves from toxic situations often show dramatic health improvements. The mind-body connection is real, and stress absolutely affects cardiac function. You made difficult choices, and your heart is thanking you for it." My life had transformed in those 6 months in ways I couldn't have imagined that morning, when Marcus called demanding I skip my appointment. I'd been promoted at work, my boss recognizing that without family drama consuming my energy, my performance had improved significantly. I'd moved to a new apartment in a building with actual security, a place where I felt safe rather than constantly anxious about unwanted visitors. Most importantly, I'd built a life full of people who actually cared about my well-being. Sarah and I had become so close that people often mistook us for sisters, the irony not lost on me. Jennifer had included me in her family gatherings, her adult children welcoming me as an honorary aunt. Mrs. Chen had introduced me to her extended family, and I now attended their monthly dim sum brunches, sitting at a table full of people who showed me what genuine family connection looked like. The support group had become a cornerstone of my social life. Robert and I had developed a friendship beyond the attorney-client relationship, occasionally meeting for coffee to discuss our respective recoveries from family trauma. He'd been right that surviving AFib was about more than medical intervention. It required completely restructuring one's life around health, rather than obligation. Marcus's bankruptcy had gone through, listing me as one of his creditors. The local newspaper had covered the filing as they did all bankruptcies. And suddenly everyone in my hometown knew that the Golden Boy had defaulted on $23,000 in loans from his sister. His softball league had quietly asked him to step down as captain. His job situation had deteriorated to the point where he'd taken a position at a call center, a far cry from his previous sales role. Katie had indeed left him, And according to mutual acquaintances who occasionally broke the silence to update me, he was living in a studio apartment and barely making rent. I felt no satisfaction in his suffering, but I felt no guilt either. These were the natural consequences of his choices, the accountability he'd avoided his entire life finally catching up to him. He'd learned that actions have consequences, that treating people badly eventually costs you, that family isn't an unlimited resource to exploit. My parents had become pariahs in their social circle. The restraining order was public record, and in a small town, that kind of information spread quickly. Their friends had read the court documents detailing their behavior, seen the medical evidence of how their stress had affected my heart, learned about Marcus's unpaid debts. The carefully maintained facade of being upstanding parents had crumbled, revealing the reality beneath. My mother had apparently told people I'd had a mental breakdown, that I'd been manipulated by Sarah and my doctors into believing false memories of family conflict. But the legal documents told a different story. One with dates, times, medical evidence, and witness testimony. Her narrative couldn't compete with documented fact. I received occasional updates through extended family members who distanced themselves from my parents after learning the truth. Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, had reached out 6 months after the restraining order to apologize for not intervening sooner. I knew your parents favored Marcus, but I didn't realize the extent of it until I read the court filings. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you when you needed family support. Linda had become an unexpected ally, filling me in on family developments while respecting my boundaries. Through her, I learned that my parents had tried to organize a family intervention, attempting to get relatives to pressure me into dropping the restraining order. The plan had backfired when most of the family sided with me after hearing the full story. Your father actually said that you were being overdramatic about a heart condition, Linda told me over coffee. I reminded him that atrial fibrillation causes strokes and that his grandson Marcus had pressured you to skip the appointment that diagnosed it. He couldn't respond to that. The facts are too clear. The most unexpected development came 8 months after the court proceedings. I received a letter, properly routed through Robert's office as required by the restraining order, from Marcus. Unlike his previous non-apology, this letter was different. Rebecca, I've been in therapy for 6 months now. Court mandated at first because of the bankruptcy, but I've continued because I'm starting to understand things I never saw before. My therapist says I was enabled my entire life, taught that my needs came first and that you existed to support me. I didn't see it that way at the time. I just thought that was normal. That's how families worked. I was wrong. I nearly killed you. Not literally, but close enough. You were having heart problems, serious ones, and I pressured you to prioritize my recreational hobby. Then when you stood your ground, I punished you with dozens of hostile messages while you were receiving a diagnosis that could have saved your life. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that I finally understand what I did. Not just the championship game morning, but years of taking advantage of you while giving nothing back. The bankruptcy destroyed my credit, but it also destroyed my illusions about who I was. I thought I was a good guy, a team captain, someone people could count on. I'm realizing I was selfish, entitled, and cruel to the one person who always showed up for me. I'm working on becoming better. Not for you, because I know I've lost any right to your presence in my life, but for myself, so I don't do this to anyone else. I hope you're healthy. I hope your heart is better. I hope you found people who treat you the way I should have. You deserve that. Marcus. I read the letter 3 times, looking for the manipulation tactics I'd learned to recognize. But this felt different, less about making me feel guilty and more about him taking genuine responsibility. I showed it to my therapist, whom I'd been seeing weekly since the restraining order was issued. What do you want to do with this? Dr. Freeman asked. Nothing, I replied after thinking about it carefully. This is him doing his own work, growing on his own timeline. That's good for him, and I'm glad he's getting help. But his growth doesn't obligate me to re-engage. I can acknowledge his progress while still maintaining my boundaries. Dr. Freeman nodded approvingly. That's a very mature and healthy response. You can wish someone well on their journey while recognizing that your journey is separate from theirs. I didn't respond to Marcus's letter, but I did file it away with the others. Evidence of the transformation that could happen when consequences finally caught up with bad behavior. Whether his change was permanent or temporary, genuine or performative, wasn't my concern. My concern was protecting the peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. My 1-year post-ablation checkup brought more good news. Dr. Yashiro was thrilled with my progress, declaring me essentially cured of AFib with proper maintenance. Your heart is functioning better than some people who've never had cardiac issues. You've done everything right. Medication compliance, stress management, healthy lifestyle choices. This is the outcome we hope for, but don't always achieve. That evening, I hosted a dinner party at my apartment. Sarah and her new boyfriend, Jennifer and her kids, Mrs. Chen and several members of her family, Robert and his partner, and a few other friends I'd made through work and the support group. My small apartment was crowded and loud with laughter, conversation, and the clatter of shared meals. Looking around at these people, my chosen family, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced during forced family gatherings at my parents' house. This was what connection was supposed to feel like. Mutual, reciprocal, built on genuine care rather than obligation. Sarah found me in the kitchen during a quiet moment, helping me refill serving platters. "You look happy," she observed. Like, genuinely happy. Not just okay or managing, but actually content with your life. "I am," I admitted, surprising myself with how true it was. A year ago, I was lying on my apartment floor after being diagnosed with a condition that could have killed me, wondering how my family could care so little. Now I'm surrounded by people who actually show up for me. My heart is healthy, and I have genuine peace in my life. The path here was brutal, but I wouldn't change it. No regrets about the lawsuits or the restraining order? None. It was the only way to establish boundaries they would respect. They couldn't hear no when I said it calmly, so they needed to hear it from a judge. The party continued late into the evening, people lingering over dessert and coffee, reluctant to end the gathering. As I said goodbye to the last guests, Mrs. Chen pulled me aside. "You have created a good life for yourself," she said, patting my hand. "Better than what you came from. This is what matters. Not blood relation, but heart relation. You have a family of the heart now." She was right. I'd spent 34 years trying to earn love from people who only valued what I could do for them. Now I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, who showed up when I needed them, who respected my boundaries and prioritized my well-being. The anniversary of the championship game morning arrived without fanfare. I didn't mark it on my calendar or dwell on the significance. But that evening I did take a moment to acknowledge how far I'd come. 1 year ago, I'd stood my ground and prioritized my health over my brother's demands. That single decision had cascaded into a complete restructuring of my life. Marcus was in bankruptcy, working a dead-end job, divorced, and living alone. My parents were socially isolated, their reputation destroyed, their relationships with most of the family strained or severed. These outcomes weren't my doing. They were the natural results of decades of behavior catching up with them. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My career was advancing, my health was excellent, my social life was fulfilling, and I had genuine peace. I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who hurt you, even when those people are family. The restraining order remained in effect, and I had no plans to lift it. My family had proven repeatedly that they couldn't or wouldn't respect boundaries unless legally compelled to do so. The legal barrier between us wasn't about punishment. It was about protection, ensuring they couldn't disrupt the life I'd built. 2 years after the initial diagnosis, I attended a medical conference where Dr. Yashiro was speaking about the psychological factors in cardiac health. He used my case with permission and anonymity as an example of how eliminating toxic stressors could dramatically improve patient outcomes. This patient's AFib episodes decreased by 95% after removing herself from an abusive family situation, he explained to the auditorium full of medical professionals. Her heart function improved, her blood pressure normalized, and her overall health markers showed remarkable enhancement. This illustrates that sometimes the best medicine isn't pharmaceutical, sometimes it's boundaries. Sitting in the audience, listening to my story framed as a medical success rather than a family tragedy, I felt a final piece of healing click into place. My choice to prioritize my health over family harmony wasn't selfish or cruel. It was medically necessary, validated by science, supported by doctors, and ultimately life-saving. That evening, I updated my will and medical directives. Sarah remained my healthcare proxy, with explicit instructions that my biological family was not to be contacted or allowed involvement in any medical decisions. Robert had helped me establish a trust for my assets, ensuring that if anything happened to me, my estate would go to the people who'd actually been there for me, not to family members who'd spent years taking advantage of my generosity. The final piece of closure came unexpectedly 3 years after the restraining order. Aunt Linda called to tell me my father had suffered a heart attack. He was stable, recovering, but he'd asked if I might be willing to visit. "He says he understands now," Linda explained carefully. "Having a cardiac event made him realize what you went through, how serious your condition was, how scared you must have been. He wants to apologize." I felt nothing, no rush of sympathy, no urge to reconcile, no guilt about maintaining my boundary. "I hope he recovers fully," I said sincerely. "But the restraining order stays in place. If he wants to apologize, he can write a letter that Robert can forward to me. I'll read it, but I'm not visiting, and I'm not opening the door to renewed contact." Linda was quiet for a moment. "I understand. I'll tell him. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Protecting yourself isn't cruel, even when the person you're protecting yourself from is family." My father's letter arrived 2 weeks later. It was shorter than Marcus's had been, more stilted, clearly difficult for him to write. He acknowledged that he'd minimized my health concerns, prioritized Marcus's wants over my needs, and failed to protect me when I needed protection. He didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. He simply stated that he was sorry and hoped I was living a good life. I filed the letter with Marcus's. Evidence that growth was possible even for people who'd spent decades reinforcing harmful patterns. But their growth didn't obligate me to re-engage. I could acknowledge their progress while still maintaining the boundaries that kept me safe. 5 years after that morning, when I chose my health over my brother's softball game, I stood in front of a room full of young professionals at a women's leadership conference, sharing my story as part of a panel on setting boundaries. The hardest boundaries to set are often with the people closest to us, I explained to the attentive audience. We're taught that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, but sometimes family is the most toxic presence in our lives, and the most radical act of self-care is walking away. I nearly died because I'd spent 34 years prioritizing other people's comfort over my own well-being. The moment I stopped doing that, my life transformed. Not just my health, but everything. I found genuine connection, built a support system of people who actually care about me, and learned what reciprocal relationships feel like. During the Q&A, a young woman raised her hand. Do you ever regret cutting off your family? Do you miss them? I miss the family I wanted them to be, I answered honestly. I miss the idea of having parents who prioritized my well-being and a brother who valued me beyond my usefulness. But I don't miss the reality of who they actually were. And I don't regret choosing life over obligation. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. After the panel, she approached me privately. My sister treats me like you described your brother treating you, always borrowing money, always demanding favors, never reciprocating. Everyone says I should be more forgiving because she's family, but it's making me physically ill. The anxiety, the stress. Then maybe it's time to prioritize your health, I said gently. Not everyone will understand. Some people will call you selfish or cruel, but you're the only one who has to live in your body, deal with the consequences of other people's behavior, and face the health impacts of maintaining toxic relationships. Choose yourself. You're worth it. That evening, I met Sarah and Jennifer for dinner at our favorite restaurant. Over wine and pasta, we celebrated another milestone. My 5-year cardiac health anniversary. 5 years of steady heartbeats, no AFib episodes, no cardiac concerns. 5 years of building a life based on genuine connection rather than obligation. Remember when we first met at the hospital after your ablation? Sarah reminisced. You were so scared, so alone except for me and the medical staff. Look at you now, thriving, speaking at conferences, helping other people set boundaries. I remember lying in that hospital bed thinking my life was over, I admitted. That I'd lost my family and had nothing left. I didn't realize then that losing them would make room for something so much better. We raised our glasses, toasting not just to my health, but to the chosen family we'd created, to boundaries that protect, to the courage to walk away from what hurts us, and to the beautiful life that emerges when we finally put ourselves first. My parents and Marcus existed somewhere in the world, living their own lives, dealing with their own consequences. I wished them no ill will, but I also felt no connection to them. They were strangers who happened to share my DNA. People I'd once loved who'd proven themselves unworthy of that love through their actions. Meanwhile, I was surrounded by people who'd earned their place in my life through consistency, respect, and genuine care. People who celebrated my successes, supported me through challenges, and never made me feel like my needs were burdensome. This was family, not the family I was born into, but the one I'd chosen and built piece by piece. As I walked home that night, I placed my hand over my heart, feeling its steady, reliable rhythm. 5 years ago, my brother had called asking me to risk this heart for his convenience. Today, I celebrated choosing it instead. The heart that had nearly failed me was now strong, protected by boundaries that kept toxic people at a distance, and surrounded by people who'd proven themselves worthy of being let in. I'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be hurt anymore, even if that refusal disappoints people who think they're entitled to hurt you. Blood relation doesn't grant permission to harm. Family isn't an excuse for abuse. And walking away from people who damage you isn't cruelty, it's survival. My life was proof that on the other side of that difficult choice, on the other side of the lawsuits and restraining orders and public family fracture, there was peace, there was health, there was genuine connection. There was a life worth living, built on my own terms, protected by boundaries I'd learned to enforce, and filled with people who understood that love is shown through actions, not obligations. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own well-being? Have you learned that sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones you need protection from? Thank you for listening. Take care. Good luck.